So 3 new Warhammer 40k Combat Patrol box sets are coming out for Death Guard, World Eaters and Emperor's Children. Let's talk about them, their contents and people's reaction to them, which of them are looking like a good deal for their money, and how do they compare with the ones before. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking more Warhammer 40k discount box sets, and in this video taking a focused look at the Death Guard and the World Eaters Combat Patrol sets. It's a fairly busy week for Warhammer 40k. The Death Guard and World Eaters Codex is dropping, and alongside them both the big initial launch Battle Force box set, plus the Combat Patrols, and the Emperor's Children coming out alongside too. If you're looking to pick up any of the new plastic goodness, then feel free to check out the channel's discount retailers linked down in the video description. They help to support Warspecs Tactics around the world if you happen to pick stuff up through them. And here are the pre-order times for those stores around the world. When the sets go live on Saturday, I'd imagine the Combat Patrol box sets will be in fairly good supply. Knowing Games Workshop though, those big launch Battle Force box sets could be very limited indeed and might sell out really quickly. Might be worth being prompt if you know that you're aiming to get them. Wasting no time though, let's take a look at these shiny new Combat Patrol box sets, talk through their contents and whether or not they're looking like a popular deal for people by a number of different metrics. First up, we've got the Death Guard Combat Patrol, which was definitely one that people were interested in seeing a replacement for the endless Poxwalker one that they had before. Not everyone hated it, but the vast majority of people really didn't consider it to be a good one. When I'd done votes on it in the past, it was rated as one of the single lowest, if not the lowest, in all of Warhammer 40k, kind of fighting for the Thousand Suns for that title. The common price for the Combat Patrol box sets tend to be $170, £100 or €130, and in the Death Guard one, there's a Lord of Virulence, a Tallyman, 7 Plague Marines, 3 Death Shroud Terminators and a Chaos Rhino, so that'll be 13 miniatures in total, though including 2 characters and a vehicle. I feel like for a useful building block to start an army, it's a pretty good one. Does feel like at least a fairly sensible mix of units. Going through them, and first up we have the Plague Marines, always a sensible one to have the faction's core troops in the Combat Patrol box set, as that's the sort of thing that newer players are going to want to get their hands on. The Plague Marines are all very busy models, with really quite a vast amount of war gear choice. Will be interesting to see if they simplify the datasheet or do anything different with them in the Death Guard Codex. They've generally been a strong unit beforehand though, pretty powerful recently with things like a Foul Blight Spawn or a Biologist Putrefier for some big lethal hits, and there was that rumour that they were going up to Toughness 6 in the new book. We'll see whether or not that one happens. It's maybe a bit of a sore spot that there's only 7 in the box set though. They don't really charge that much less than the 10-man Space Marine box sets for getting far fewer miniatures. I know it's the Deity Legion of 7 and everything, but it still means that you get fewer models than you'd get otherwise. For the leader of the box set, we've got the Lord of Virulence. This was the 9th edition model release for the Death Guard, a sort of Plague Gunnery Commander with his twin Plague Spewer, plus an all rather goopy looking Power Fist there. Quite a fun miniature. He's maybe been a little bit on the niche side. He generally tends to be good when Plague Burst Crawlers are good in the current index. The Tallyman has often been a useful buffing character. I'd still say it's quite good for his points cost at the moment at 45 points. He's keeping tallies of the plagues on that abacus there it seems. And he has the chance to generate some command points at the moment, which is rather nice. For Plague Marines and Rhinos though, they've often tended to go for the damage dealer style characters. Then we've got the Death Shroud Terminators, equipped with their iconic Man Reapers. They're sort of the bodyguards of the Legion, and in the index version they've certainly been enormously tanky with good stats, lots of damage and defense, and auto include in most competitive lists. Pretty nice iconic models as well. And then finally we've got a Chaos Rhino. This one's just the standard more generic version, so it's the only non-Death Guard model in the box set. Still really handy to have to transport Plague Marines about though, and get them to the front in style. Obviously points might change in the future, and fingers crossed if they do manage to make things a bunch more tougher and give them some interesting special rules, points might go up a bit, but with current index numbers it'll be 80 points for the Lord of Virulence, 45 for the Tallyman, 125 for 7 Plague Marines, 110 for 3 Death Shroud, and 75 points for a Chaos Rhino. Putting that together, that'll be around about 435 points in the box, so 2.6 points per dollar, which isn't terrible as 40k goes, much better than some Combat Patrols, though still put it as sort of middling as opposed to standout. For the discount side of things, the pricing of the box set's usually £100 or $170. Adding up the prices of the kits, it'll be around about $260 worth of kits in the box set. And that certainly seems to be on the upper end for 40k Combat Patrol sets these days, around about a 35% discount, where I'd say the average is probably more like 30-ish. I think it was kind of unlikely that Games Workshop would have given much more of a discount than this, so the Death Guard haven't done too badly with this one. The box set that it's replacing is the previous very Poxwalker themed one. I think they were going for a sort of Harbinger style flair with Typhus and then many copies of the Poxwalker kit, plus some Plague Marines and the Biologist Putrefier. Compared with the old one, at least in terms of points in the box and discount in the box, it seems that it's a small win for the new one. That's got around about 435 points versus 405 with current numbers, and it's got a slightly higher value worth of kits there, though obviously all a bit arbitrary depending on what Games Workshop charges for them. So good on those numbers, though it looks like the old Combat Patrol probably had a bit more plastic when you add it all up, just due to the sheer amount of Plague Zombie style models. When put to a public vote between the two though, it really isn't any contest. The vast majority prefer the new one to the old one, only 13% voting for the Plague Zombie box set, which is kind of interesting in itself. It does show that while the old one was really quite unpopular, it still did have a following, and at least a chunk of people would rate it above the new one. I feel like it genuinely wasn't too bad as a building block in an army. It was basically Death Guard if you wanted a horde expansion to them to have a bunch of zombies to hold your objectives and screen, but certainly didn't feel like the sort of core of the army that you might hope and expect a Combat Patrol box set to be. Otherwise though, just for a general popularity opinion of the new box set was pretty good. You guys rated this at 3.7 out of 5, and that does put it above a fair few of the sort of middle tier Combat Patrol ones. For example, we've got Chaos Space Marines on 3.4, Tower Norks on 3.1 to 3.2, but not quite as high as the most popular ones like the rather good Custodes one or the current Drukhari one. Overall this feels quite well received though. Overall, between all that, I think I would agree. The models are nice enough plastics, the Death Guard range are pretty modern ones, they are quite busy and maybe not to literally everyone's taste, but I think they're well enough done for what they are. Maybe the Rhino being the only sticking point in terms of model quality. It's not a bad kit, but it's really quite a dated one at this point. Gameplay is a little bit irrelevant maybe just before a Codex comes out, at least for 10th though, the majority of the box set's been fairly standout. Plague Marines and Rhinos have been really good, as have Death Shroud Terminators. Maybe the characters both being a little bit more niche in their own way, though playable enough. It's quite nice that the leaders can both lead units in the box set, which hasn't always been the case, though I feel like you'd probably be more tempted by a Lord of Contagion with the Death Shroud Terminators. I guess they don't have one of those boxed on his own though. Then for value feeling, there's not a huge amount of models in the box, but you do get one vehicle and 2 characters and the 3 big elite Terminators. The low model number does feel like a bit of a criticism though. Having 2 characters doesn't help with that, given that Games Workshop charges a lot for them, nor does the 3 model elite box set, nor does the 7-man Plague Bearers. Basically a bunch of things to go together to make this really quite a small compact Death Guard force. Does feel like the sort of box set that you could get in multiples if you wanted though. Maybe convert the Lord of Virulence into a Lord of Contagion with some bits or something, and overall seems like it's going to be popular. I guess for Death Guard players, it's going to be somewhat competing against the Poxraw Vector Big Battle Force box this weekend, which generally people have had a pretty good reaction to as well. That's been seen as quite a good one with the Demon Engines and some different flavours of Terminators. Feels like if you didn't want a big Death Guard force, you could easily buy the 2 of them together. Before we move on to the World Eaters, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Weyland-Yutani Terrain. These guys are one amongst many options for putting a competitive style board of terrain on the table for Warhammer 40k, with their main focus being on gameplay and a bit more function over form if anything. Their terrain sets are made of pretty sturdy and durable plastic card with printed designs on them. There's a few different custom ones that you can choose from, overgrown ruins or Arctic laboratories or things. And here's one example of a typical terrain set from them: 4 big ruins, 6 medium ones, some Munitorum containers, and some optional bases for the ruins to define their footprint. As it goes, fairly cheap and good value for a full table worth of 40k terrain in my opinion, around £120 or $150 shipping from the EU. You also have the current WTC per Eye Nexus terrain pack, they're the official suppliers for that great big tournament. And they do have plenty of other smaller packs as well, such as this set of 4 3-story ruins. Could be handy enough to just add a bit of functional terrain to an otherwise slightly narrative but not so line of sight blocking table. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their stuff, and there's a code ALLSPECS5 for 5% off if you did happen to buy anything from them. Let's get on to those World Eaters though. And then you Combat Patrol box sets, they've got the standard Demon Prince model, the Master of Executions from Codex Chaos Space Marines, then 10 Khorne Berserkers and 10 Jackals. Again, at first impressions kind of seems alright for 10th edition Combat Patrol norms. Maybe quite good to get one fairly big and dangerous model in that Demon Prince. In general, they really seem to limit big monsters and tanks just because they want everything to be able to be handled, but in a 500 point game of Warhammer 40k, seems like the Demon Prince is about one of the biggest and scariest things they've included in a good while. Looking through the miniatures, first up we have that rather dominant Demon Prince model in the kit. He's really quite a fun and recent miniature from Games Workshop, having a sort of dual model that can do both Age of Sigmar and 40k. The one on the right maybe modelling some of the more 40k style options. You can assemble him with the big wings though. I do quite like the head swap options on these guys as well. There's one each for the different Chaos deities, so you can have one that's got a bit of focal theming to Khorne. They've often tended to be at least fairly interesting models, being a big character that has some big damage dealing and could be an interesting choice for certain enhancements, particularly durability ones. Next up, there's the Master of Executions. He is just the standard Chaos Space Marine model. In the Combat Patrol box art, they've done a head swap with him with a Khorne Berserker one, which I think does add a bit more World Eater's flair to him. He's previously meant that his unit could fight first, and I think he'll still be the only generic character that can allow enhancements into Khorne Berserker units. We'll yet to see exactly what his rules will be in the new codex though. Those leaks seem to state that he'd lose the fight first. Then we've got the Khorne Berserkers, nicely received foot troops of the Blood God. If you're going to collect World Eaters, then you'll want a good number of these. Very nice to see in the Combat Patrol box set, and generally dangerous troops hefting their chain axes. Then finally we've got the Cultist Jackals with their blood tanks on the back, often useful as objective support. Their sticky objectives is pretty handy for when World Eaters inevitably want to start throwing themselves towards the enemy and taking the fight to them as opposed to sitting in the midfield getting shot. Between those models, again we don't know their final points cost, but these are what they'd be at the moment. The Demon Prince is around about 170 points depending on exact build, the Khorne Berserkers 180 for 10 of them, the Jackals 65, and the Master of Executions 110. Based on the previous leaks, if the Demon Prince winds up getting a lone operative style option, and the Winged Prince hits harder, I wouldn't be too surprised to see that number go up a bit, and I wouldn't be too surprised to see the Master of Executions go down fairly significantly if he does indeed lose fights first. Maybe those two will balance each other out, but either way it looks like it'll be okay for points in the box. Lightly over 500 points in the moment, which definitely puts it at the upper end of 10th edition combat patrols by a fair way. For theoretical discount in the box set, if you bought the exact same miniatures separately, the Demon Prince will be $84, the Khorne Berserkers $65, the Jackals $58, which I must admit seems to have a surprisingly small price difference between the fully fledged Khorne Berserkers there, and then the Master of Executions is priced at a sort of cheaper support character kind of model at $35. It all adds up to $242 US, so you save around about $70 or 30% of other currencies out there. And for this one, I'd say it's more sort of directly in line with the typical discounts Games Workshop does for their combat patrols, not really either better nor worse. For this one, it'll be replacing the previous Combat Patrol box set for the Berserkers. This one had the Lord on Juggernaut that you could build as Lord Invocatus, 20 Khorne Berserkers and 10 Jackals. It was considered to be one of the better Combat Patrol box sets. It certainly adequately filled your foot troops for the army, and it could mean that you could very quickly have a Berserker horde if you wanted to, 40 of the guys if you wanted to pick up 2 sets of this. Numbers wise, for comparison with the previous, it's pretty much similar to the point of being not too much difference. By current numbers, the old one has got a few more points than the new, but that could easily change with codex things being shifted around. It looks like the old one had very slightly more money in the box, though in my opinion not really notably different, and not so much that it would really change your thoughts on it. Maybe a tiny win for the old one by those metrics, but not too significantly. I was interested to see the results when they were put head to head at the vote here, a good Combat Patrol versus another fairly good one that was replacing it. Looks like it's a very narrow win for the old box set with 20 Berserkers, they're not really too different there. Kind of depends on whether or not you want loads of the actual dedicated Khorne models or big scary monster thrown into the mix, though at the price of having 2 miniatures that aren't really unique World Eaters ones, more slightly Chaos Space Marine, more generic ones. Overall though, again it does seem broadly well received. You gave it a 3.5 out of 5 when I asked you to rate it, so a tiny bit lower than the Death Guard one, but still on the upper end of 40k combat patrols in general. For a few thoughts on this one, the models themselves all seem nice enough, high quality miniatures. The Master of Executions definitely the slightly older one, but not crazily so. I guess maybe the only criticism model wise was, as mentioned, the Demon Prince and the Master of Executions being more generic Chaos Marine models, so not even particularly part of the World Eater's small range. Perhaps wouldn't have been awful to still see the Juggernaut Lord as part of the box set instead of the Master perhaps. Gameplay wise, obviously still things very up in the air while the points cost for the codex aren't out. Jackals and Berserkers are both pretty usable at the moment, Jackals particularly so for helping with objectives and things. It does feel unlikely that Berserkers will spend a significant amount of time out of the spotlight. I feel like if they're so weak that nobody's playing them, Games Workshop will buff them. They feel like they've got some side grades in the recent leaks, dropping a pip of strength but also having really big blood surge moves and movement 8. The Demon Prince have generally been a bit on the niche side, but okay in vessels since the points drop, and if they get similar sort of changes as rumoured for the lone operatives and harder hitting rules, then it could be nice for them. The Master of Executions kind of depends on what he does. I quite like to see the full data sheet from him, though losing fighting first would mean he's a bit more of a generic commander lord type thing, as opposed to his whole thing being about having his berserkers jump on the enemy before they get to attack. Overall feels nice enough on the sort of plastic front though. 21 models and one small monster feels appropriate enough for a Combat Patrol box set, and again it does look like this one's broadly been quite well received. I guess at the weekend that'll be competing against the Gorestorm Slaughter Pack. It does look like the Combat Patrol's initially looking a bit more popular than this box though. This one's the very 8-bound heavy one with the Slaughter bound and then 20 Jackals. Finally, for the Combat Patrol releases this week, we've got the Emperor's Children one, this one with the Lord Exultant, 2 sets of Flawless Blades, and then the 10 Infractors that you can build as Tormentors. The Flawless Blades are the elite possessed of Slaanesh pretty much, not technically possessed and just given a whole bunch of mutations and boons, and they have their special rule where they can wound everything on a 3+, but not without peril. I think general consensus is that they could probably do with a points cut to make them more useful. The Lord Exultant is the generic faction leader, lethal hits and big melee damage. He can pair really well with Infractors to hit really hard, quite nice with enhancements to make him scarier. And then the Troops box set is the Tormentors and Infractors. This one's weirdly expensive when bought separately at $70 or £44. Kind of surprising to see that more than Khorne Berserkers, if I'm honest. It kind of only underlines as the Combat Patrol or Champions of Slaanesh box as the best way to get them. Both squads look really useful in game. Tormentors for sticky objectives and infiltrate, then Infractors to maybe jump out of rhinos or just footslog across the board dead fast with the Lord Exultant and deliver them into melee. They can scout as well to help them get them there. For points in the box, they're 470 points, so 2.8 points per dollar, and that's a pretty solid number relative to other Combat Patrols, seemingly a little bit more than the Death Guard, less than the World Eaters. Again, this one isn't super heavy on the plastic, given that there's 2 copies of a 3-model Elite kit from Games Workshop, and that's often a recipe for fewer models than you'd really want. The discount here is again in line with Games Workshop's norms pretty much, 31% off, so pretty similar to other Combat Patrols. You guys rated these for a pretty sort of similar level of value, giving them a 3.6 stars out of 5, again seemingly above average on first impressions from Combat Patrols out there. It looks like a lot of Emperor's Children players are looking forward to picking one of these up. In my polls it looked like they could be the best selling out of the 3 Combat Patrols this weekend. I guess there's been a bunch of people jumping into the Emperor's Children. Overall, broadly speaking, looks pretty positive for the 3 different Combat Patrols this week by your ratings and the numbers. Feels quite nice to actually get some Combat Patrols to say good things about. I feel like there's been a lot in 10th edition that really haven't been so great by the numbers. Ones like the Admech really weren't well received, and the Astra Militara one was about one of the least popular box sets that Games Workshop have released in a really long time. So nice to see some broadly helpful ones that look okay for points and discount. Let me know what you make of them down in the comments. Which would you rate as best? And players of those factions, would you be tempted to pick any of them up? As mentioned, for those doing so, there's channel affiliate discounters linked down in the video description, and as always a big thank you to any supporting the channel when picking stuff up from them. In any case, I'll leave that one there now. As mentioned, a big thank you to Weyland-Yutani Terrain for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check out their terrain things down in the video description, and there's that Allspecs code for 5% off if you do pick up any terrain from them. I'll leave this there for now though. A big thank you for listening. Feel free to subscribe to Allspecs Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep up with the regular 40k news and things, including any reveals for the World Eaters and Death Guard this week. I'll look forward to reviewing the codexes when we get it. Check out all the bits in the video description, including the Patreon page and those affiliate links. A massive thank you to anyone who's supporting via those. But in any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.